Hello, my name is Daryl Leary. I seem to suffer from a number of pathologies. I was officially diagnosed with chronic depression and generalized anxiety. I also had a psychiatrist diagnose me with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And my previous counselor, along with many family members, believe I have Aspergers syndrome. Even though I have not been officially diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is now considered to be part of the more broader autism spectrum disorder, I do think I may be partly autistic. It would seem that I share the inability to appropriately comprehend nonverbal cues and the more subtle social conventions associated with Asperger's syndrome, also commonly referred to as high-functioning autism. And like most Aspies, I suspect I have a limited emotional reciprocity. I just have a difficult time understanding why people think the way they do. So much so that many times I constantly question what I should say to others in fear that I'll say something socially inappropriate to them. Like most Aspies, it is a lack of cognitive empathy, but not a lack of affective empathy. And there's a huge difference between cognitive and affective empathy. Psychopaths have cognitive empathy. They understand why a person feels a certain way. They just do not care why a person feels sad or upset. An Aspie has affective empathy. They care that a person is sad or upset. They just do not always understand exactly why the person is sad or upset. And so I do not read people well. I'm at a loss for reading emotions expressed upon people's faces, what is being expressed by people's body language, comprehending tones used by people, and understanding people's hints. I find it difficult to know when I should talk within a conversation and being relevant to the discussion or the flow of a discussion. Some social subtleties are a mystery to me, unless a logical explanation can be offered as to why I follow a certain convention. To me, it is like a secret rule book everyone was privy to read except me. For me, it is quite the frustration because there are those areas of social communication where I simply lack a certain awareness, and I simply cannot change what I am not aware of within my own behavior, because I do not know what it is that I need to change about myself or how to change it. It's like being colorblind and only being aware of black, white, and grays, while everyone is trying to convince me that there are colors to consider. And no matter how much I analyze my black and white world, I will never come to the conclusion that there are colors, nor will I understand exactly what they mean by colors. But I could also be operating from a neurological deficit. It may become intuitive and therefore quite easy for people to be able to read other people, but for me it's like a complex code I need to break. I have no idea if a girl is flirting with me or just being friendly. I have no idea if I'm boring somebody or if someone finds me interesting. And many times I cannot tell if a person likes me or dislikes me unless they tell me directly. I have found it quite aggravating that so many women will hint what they want rather than just say what they want. What really speaks to me about Asperger's is that most Aspies describe a world where they feel out of sync to everyone, like a school of fish that intuitively swims in its own direction while you are the odd fish out. Like most Aspies, I have a very strong sense that I'm the weird or the strange kid on the block, and that is an ugly feeling to have. Later in my years, I was described as eccentric, but in my youth, I was described as socially inept, or a nerd, or weird. Because of the aforementioned and my social anxiety, I was vulnerable to being severely bullied in school, especially from grade 9 to 12. I had no control over my social anxiety. Neurologically, my brain is hypersensitive to potential threats. If someone engaged me with a subtle threat or even a microaggression, to me it would feel as if they had a gun pointed to my head. But again, this was out of my control because the amount of anxiety and fear I had to overcome was unreasonable compared to the average individual. For many years of my life, I had one wish: to be normal like everyone else. I was and still am envious of normal people, or as Aspies would call them, neurotypicals, because they were neurologically typical. Normal people have such an easy time making friends and socializing with others. It seems most unfair. Many Aspies like myself would probably tell you that rejection and being ostracized is a big theme in their lives. Of course, also having ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, made most of my schooling difficult. Especially during elementary school years, I had an incredibly hard time focusing on a single subject without being easily distracted. It is hard to learn when your brain cannot focus long enough to connect a series of relevant thoughts together to form new ideas, and because of such, my learning was constantly interrupted and disjointed by intrusive thoughts. As an adult, I am constantly being pulled by various motivations to do different things. Many times I cannot decide on what exactly to do first, and my brain many times will get lost in daydreams and intrusive thoughts that I just cannot seem to ignore. It is an agony in itself. Chronic depression has limited what many more successes I would have otherwise had in my life. But when I get depressed, I just lose my most basic motivations. Even motivating myself to take a shower when I need to seems like a dreadful chore. It's like the world of vibrant color has become a world of dull black and white and grays. When I'm depressed, I will typically criticize myself and my life. I will question my value as a human being, question the value of my own life, and usually conclude it as not worthwhile. And begin to feel and believe that I have been more of a burden to society than an asset. The hardest part of depression is the intensity of dark emotions that are a companion to my thoughts. Some emotions are so intense I've literally felt as if I was the ugliest person in the world. One of the two hardest parts of mental illness is not understanding what exactly is wrong with you. Even now, I struggle to understand how all of my pathologies work together. I struggle to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. There is so much confusion and suffering from mental illness. Confusion in trying to separate what is your fault, the fault of others, or just bad luck. There is just a lot of confusion in knowing what is reality and what you think reality is. And thus believing that you are simply incompetent, believing that you are at personal fault for your condition and its effect on your life, believing that you are simply not worthwhile because you believe you ought to have more or better control of your thoughts and actions, even believing that if others had the very same pathology, they would be far more successful in life than you. I would say there is a lot of guilt and self-blame involved with mental illness because you do not readily see that you are at a neurological disadvantage from others. You still hold yourself to the same standard as everyone else and thus judge yourself from that unrealistic standard. The second hardest part of mental illness is that the emotional suffering that is involved and the constant emotional turmoil that is involved. I hope this video has brought you some insight to do with mental illness. Thank you. I'm Daryl Leary.